Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere very quiet, very green, and just a little bit strange. You might not have experienced this before. A village hidden in the folds of Romanian hills, where sheep roam freely, old women whisper blessings in the wind, and one shepherd only speaks in rhymes. I promise it's not scary, it's just different. The kind of difference that makes your head tilt and your heart feel light. You can close your eyes if you like. Picture slow golden hills under a lilac sky. Picture a child, younger me, with dust on my sandals, standing at the edge of a tiny village that smelled of baked plums and wood smoke. I was maybe 10, maybe 11. That summer, my parents sent me to live with my grandmother while they worked in the city. Her village didn't have a name on most maps, just a looping road, 3 rows of houses, and a small church that rang the bell only when it felt like it. All right, now let's get into today's diary entry. I arrived at the start of summer, just as the fields bloomed with little white flowers. Grandma's house sat crookedly on a slope, its red roof like a melting candy. The air there was softer, slower. Days stretched, nights wrapped around you like a quilt. No internet, no television, just the bees, the chickens, and whatever strange magic lived in the fields. On the second day, I noticed him. He stood by the pasture's edge, a tall man with a long wool coat, even though the sun was blazing. His beard was a waterfall of white, but his face didn't look old. There was a steadiness in how he leaned on his crooked staff. His flock, maybe 20 sheep, moved like dancers around him, not wandering too far. At first, I didn't think much of it. Every village has a shepherd. But then he spoke. He was talking to the goats, or maybe to the wind. His voice floated over the tall grass like smoke. Wander not near the forest gloom, or you'll find yourself wrapped in a tune. I thought maybe I'd misheard. But no, he kept going, rhyming everything, asking the goats questions in verse, warning the cows with limericks. Later that evening, over a bowl of thick soup, I asked Grandma about him. "Oh, him," she said, not even looking up. "That's Mihu. He's always been like that, since he was a boy." "Why does he rhyme?" I asked, slurping a little too loudly. She shrugged. "No one knows. Some say it's a gift. Others say he went up the wrong hill once and came back different." Different how? Just different. That was Grandma, queen of vague answers. But the image stuck with me, the man in the field speaking to animals in poetry. The next day I tried to get closer. I walked past the pasture pretending to chase butterflies, and he saw me. He raised his hand and smiled, deep wrinkles crinkling his face. "You chase the winged and the wing chase you. But what will you do when the wing slips through?" I blinked. Hello." He just chuckled, ruffled his sheepdog's fur, and turned away. There was something else about him, not just the rhyming. The animals adored him. His sheep never strayed, and his goats never kicked. Even the birds flew low when he sang. By the end of the week, I'd started listening for his voice every morning like a game. He'd always be somewhere nearby, by the well under the walnut tree along the lane, murmuring his strange verses. And each day he seemed to notice me a little more. One morning he tossed me a small shiny stone and said, "Keep this close and dreams stay bright. Lose it once and fear takes flight." I still don't know what it meant, but I kept it, slid it into my pocket like a treasure. And that was how our quiet friendship began. There was one odd thing, though. No one else in the village talked about Mihu much. They'd nod politely if he walked past, but they didn't invite him for tea or ask him to bless their animals like they did with other shepherds. It wasn't mean, it was like they'd quietly agreed to let him be. Else, he didn't seem to mind. The days passed like song, slow, warm, with little surprises. A bird in my windowsill, a plum so sweet it tasted like honey, a rainbow that appeared without any rain. I wandered through gardens, helped Grandma bake bread, tried to befriend the suspicious village cat. But always my ears were tuned for rhymes drifting from the hills. And then something happened. One evening, as I helped Grandma gather herbs from her garden, one of her goats' little Puff didn't come home. We waited, shook the grain bucket, called her name. Nothing. She must have wandered off, Grandma said, already wrapping her shawl. Come, let's ask Mihu. He'll know. We walked up the ridge past the flowering nettles and the broken fence post. Mihu was there as always, sitting beneath the pear tree with his sheep clustered nearby. As we approached, he looked up and spoke before we could say anything. White and round, with hooves so light, she danced away just past twilight. Toward the grove where shadows bend, she'll return if you listen to the wind. I shivered a little. Grandma didn't bat an eye. Thank you, Mihu, she said and turned to go. Wait, I said. What grove? But he just smiled and said nothing more. That night, I lay in bed with the window open, hoping for a breeze or a rhyme or a goat's bleat. All I got was the rustling of trees and the slow, soft bleating of sheep in the distance. Still the words echoed in my head, toward the grove where shadows bend, and I knew with a strange certainty that tomorrow I would find that grove. The next morning, the village was wrapped in mist, not the heavy, spooky kind, but a light shawl of cloud that softened everything, the trees, the roofs, even the chickens scratching in the dirt. Grandma let me sleep in a little longer, and when I wandered into the kitchen, she was already baking bread. The air smelled like roasted walnuts and something sweet. Eat first, she said, handing me a crusty heel with plum jam. Then you can go look. Look for what? She raised an eyebrow. Don't play dumb. That goat's not coming back on her own. So I took the hint. I wrapped a few slices of bread in a cloth, tucked the shiny stone Mihu gave me into my pocket for good luck, and set out. I didn't head straight toward the fields. Mihu's rhyme from yesterday was stuck in my head. Toward the grove where shadows bend. There was only one place I could think of, the stand of willow trees just past the old wooden fence. The villagers didn't go there much. They said the ground was always wet even in summer. Some said the trees whispered if you stood close enough. Perfect. I walked slowly, pretending I wasn't nervous. The air was cooler near the grove. The grass was taller too, brushing against my knees. The closer I got, the quieter it became. Even the birds seemed to have stopped chirping. Then I heard a voice. Faint, sing-songy, not quite words. I ducked under a low branch and found myself at the edge of the grove. There were maybe 20 willow trees, their branches hanging low like curtains. The light barely filtered through. I stepped inside, and just like that, the sound stopped. Total silence. But I saw something, a patch of flattened grass and tiny hoof prints. Puff had been here. I knelt and touched the prints, still fresh. Then I heard it again, white and round with hooves so light. But it wasn't Mihu's voice. It was younger, clearer. I turned. There was no one. I don't know how long I stayed there, squinting into the shadows, trying to decide whether to follow the trail deeper. The air smelled like damp leaves and something sweeter, like apples and old honey. And then just behind one of the trees, I saw movement. A girl. She couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. She wore a dress the color of river stones, and her hair was tied in two thick braids with bright red ribbons. In her arms, she carried a woven basket filled with stones. She didn't look scared to see me. In fact, she smiled like we'd been playing hide and seek and I just found her. You're looking for something, she said. Yeah, a goat. White, curly, curious. I blinked. Yes. She nodded and reached into her basket, pulling out a smooth, flat rock. She turned it over and showed me a carved symbol. It looked like a spiral. She passed through here, she said gently, placing the stone back. But she wasn't alone. What do you mean? The girl walked over to the willow tree nearest me and tied one of her red ribbons around a branch. There's a song that calls curious animals. Some people can hear it, some people can't. Like Mihu, I asked. She smiled. He hears better than most. I took a cautious step forward. Do you know where my goat went? She followed the ribbon path. You'll need to wait for the next rhyme. The next rhyme. But the girl didn't answer. She stepped back into the grove, ribbons trailing from her basket, and in a blink, she was gone. I called out, but she didn't return. I wandered around the grove for a while looking for more hoof prints or red ribbons, but all I found were strange spiral carvings on the bark of several trees. Eventually, I headed home goatless and more confused than ever. When I got back, Grandma was stirring a pot of thick soup. She didn't ask any questions, just handed me a spoon. "She's still missing," I said. "She'll come back when it's time," she replied, as if that settled it. I was beginning to notice that no one in this village gave straight answers. That evening, Mihu passed by our gate. He didn't stop, but he did toss a rhyme over the fence as he went. "The trees may bend and branches sway, but truth walks slow by end of day." Cryptic as always. I lay in bed that night watching the moonlight creep across the ceiling. Somewhere out there, Puff was wandering past spiral trees and strange girls with baskets of stones. And for the first time, I wondered if this was just about a missing goat or something bigger. That thought stayed with me as I drifted into sleep. And just before I lost consciousness, I thought I heard the tiniest voice whisper, "Follow the ribbon, watch for the rhyme." The next morning, the fog was gone, but a thin mist still clung to the fields like breath on glass. I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all, even though I knew I had. Dreams had rolled through my mind like soft waves, ribbons drifting through trees, goats walking backward, Mihu standing on a rock, speaking to the clouds. I slipped out of bed and checked the window. No sign of Puff, but something was different. A small red ribbon was tied to the branch of the plum tree just outside the gate. It hadn't been there yesterday. I rushed out in my pajamas, barefoot on the cool grass. It was definitely one of the girls' ribbons, same silky fabric, same careful knot. I untied it gently. Beneath it, just barely pressed into the dirt, was a trail. Hoof prints again, small and familiar. Puffs. They led away from the house, curving back toward the grove, but then veered off in a new direction toward the hill beyond the orchard. I followed, clutching the ribbon in one hand, the shiny stone in the other. The trail led to a place I hadn't explored before. A little hill crowned with a single willow tree, taller and wilder than the others. Its trunk twisted like two ropes braided together, and its leaves shivered even though there was no wind. And sitting beneath it, of course, was Mihu. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Ah," he said, not looking up. "You've come to chase the ghost of curls past silver roots and ribbon swirls. But wait a while, the time is near. The willow waits with eyes that hear." I stood there, catching my breath, trying to decipher the riddle. "Mihu," I said carefully, "did you see Puff? Did she come this way?" He tapped the ground beside him. "Sit." So I did. We sat in silence for a bit, listening to the rustle of the willow leaves above us. Then he pulled something from his satchel, a tiny wooden flute, smooth and worn like it had been passed down through many hands. He began to play. It wasn't a tune I recognized. It wandered, dipped, rose like a question and fell like a sigh. Birds didn't scatter. They came closer. One landed on a branch above us and tilted its head. When the music ended, Mihu turned to me. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "the goat is not the goal." I stared at him. He chuckled, seeing my confusion. "Follow the trail that does not turn, where shadows stretch and grasses burn. And if you reach the river's bend, look for the girl who does not end." I sighed. "You could just say, 'Go left at the tree.'" He laughed, full and soft, and patted my shoulder. But as I stood to leave, I noticed something glinting by the base of the willow tree. I knelt and brushed aside the grass. A small object, metal, slightly rusted. It was Puff's bell. I picked it up, heart skipping. She had definitely been here. But why would she take off her bell? Had someone taken it off her? I turned back to Mihu, but he was already walking away, humming a melody that seemed to loop into itself like a snake eating its tail. I followed the hoof prints down the far side of the hill. The grass was shorter here, and the trail was easier to see. Every so often, I found another red ribbon tied to a twig or stone. They led to a clearing I didn't know existed, surrounded by thick hedges and wild rose bushes. In the center was a low stone wall, the kind that looked like it used to be part of something, maybe a well, maybe a ruin. And tied neatly around one of the stones was a tiny scrap of parchment. I unfolded it. She waits where echoes sleep and water hums, where frogs once sang and silence drums. Another riddle, another rhyme. I looked around. There was no water here, but I knew where there was some, the old stream past the orchard just before the forest started. It had a small stone bridge and was usually dry this time of year, unless someone had been leading her there. As I walked back through the fields, the red ribbons became fewer, but the sense of being led remained. The goat wasn't just missing, she was part of something odd and gentle and old, like a forgotten game that someone had started playing again. When I got home, I tucked the parchment into my drawer and tied the bell to the handle where it chimed faintly whenever someone passed. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the girl with the ribbons, the spiral stones, and Mihu's song. My dreams were quieter this time, just the sound of hooves and willow leaves, and the whisper of an unseen voice repeating, "Where echoes sleep and water hums." The next morning, I woke up before the rooster crowed. The room was still wrapped in that gray-blue light that makes everything feel like a dream you haven't left yet. For a moment, I couldn't tell if the faint bell sound I heard was real or left over from sleep. I sat up, blinked, and there it was again, a soft jingle somewhere outside. Puff's bell. I didn't even bother with shoes. I grabbed my coat, the shiny stone, and the red ribbon I'd untied yesterday. The bell had stopped, but I knew where I needed to go. Down the slope, past the rows of squash plants and sunflowers, the grass slick with dew. I crossed the orchard, careful not to slip on the overripe plums, crushed into the dirt, and made my way toward the stream. The path was lined with tall thistle and white weeds that brushed against my knees. The trees arched overhead, their branches like gentle arms pushing me forward. The stream was running today. That was strange. Usually in the summer, it was dry, just a cracked bed and a few stubborn frogs. But now it trickled over the rocks, murmuring softly, like someone humming under their breath. I stopped at the little stone bridge and sat on the edge, feet dangling above the water. I could hear it faint but steady, not Puff's bell, something else, a melody. I followed the sound upstream where the brush grew denser and the light came in slanted golden beams through the trees. And then just ahead I saw her, the ribbon girl. She was sitting on a moss-covered log, her basket beside her, and she was stacking stones on top of each other, flat ones, smooth ones, ones shaped like teardrops. Her braids swung gently with each movement. When she saw me, she didn't look surprised. "You came," she said simply. "I heard something," I replied. "Good. That means you're listening now." I stepped closer. "Do you know where my goat is?" She tilted her head. "She's safe, but she's not the one who's lost." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She picked up a stone, turned it in her fingers, and handed it to me. On one side was a tiny spiral. On the other, a name, Mina. "That's you," she said, "isn't it?" I nodded slowly. "How do you know my name?" She smiled. "You've been here before. You just don't remember." My skin prickled. "No, I haven't. This is my first summer here." "Is it?" she said, her eyes glinting with something ancient. "Or is it the first time you followed the rhymes?" I didn't know what to say. My mouth opened, then closed again. She stood up and tied another red ribbon to a low-hanging branch. They mark the places where things were forgotten, places that remember you even if you don't remember them. She turned and began walking her bare feet, making no sound on the moss. I followed, unsure why, but completely certain that I had to. We walked in silence for a while until we came to a small clearing. A circle of stones sat in the center, half buried in grass and leaves. In the middle was a shallow bowl carved into the earth, filled with water that shimmered like silver. "This is the listening place," she said, "where the rhymes begin and end." I knelt beside the bowl, my reflection rippled. Puff was drawn here by the sound, just like you, just like me. I turned to her. "Why me?" "Because you asked the question," she said. "Most people hear the rhymes and forget them by morning. You didn't. That's all it takes." I looked back into the water. A shape flickered behind my reflection, small, white, fluffy. Poof! She was standing just beyond the trees looking at me like nothing had happened, like she hadn't been missing at all. I stood heart racing, but the girl held up a hand. "She's yours again now. But remember, she only wandered because you were ready." "Ready for what?" The girl stepped backward into the woods to remember. And just like that, she was gone. I turned toward the goat. She trotted up cheerful as ever and nuzzled my hand. Her bell jingled softly, and I noticed it had a new ribbon tied around it, red like the others. I walked her home slowly, the sun beginning to climb above the trees. And as we passed through the village, no one even looked surprised to see her. Not even Mihu, who was leaning against the gate humming to himself. As I passed, he gave a little nod. "Return a bell, receive a clue. But what you seek still waits for you." I stared at him. "She's home now." He tapped his flute against his chin. "So are you. But home is only half the map." Before I could ask what that meant, he turned and whistled for his sheep. Puff and I stood there for a long time after he left. She chewed calmly on a dandelion. I stared at the ribbon in my hand. That night I dreamed again. But this time I wasn't lost. I was walking the grove with the ribbon girl. We didn't speak. We just listened. And somewhere in the distance a soft voice was whispering, "Ask the wind, ask the trees, follow rhyme and you'll find keys." The next morning I woke up with a line of the dream still stuck in my head. "Follow rhyme and you'll find keys." I whispered it aloud as I stretched, like saying it might shake loose its meaning. Poof was already awake, sitting by the open window with her head tilted slightly, like she too had heard something in her sleep. Her new ribbon was still tied neatly to her collar, and the bell gave a cheerful jingle as she shifted. It would have been easy to pretend that everything was back to normal, that Puff had just wandered off and returned like any silly goat might, that the red ribbons, the flute songs, the spiral stones, all of it was just my imagination fueled by too many sunny days and too little television. But I didn't want to pretend, because something had changed. After breakfast, I went outside hoping to catch a glimpse of Mihu. He wasn't by the usual walnut tree, nor was he on the hill or near the pasture. I wandered further than usual through the dried corn rows behind the church, where the land dips into a hidden hollow. And that's when I heard it again. A song, not Mihu's flute, but his voice, singing softly with that rhyming rhythm that made the air feel strange and important. I crouched behind a thicket of tall grass and listened. When stone turns soft and bells do fly, a whisper waits beneath the sky. Where circles form and echoes lie, that's where forgotten things still cry. The melody lingered in the air like fog. I stood brushing off my knees. Mihu. He didn't look startled to see me, just gestured for me to come closer. He was sitting beside a strange set of tracks in the earth, not hoof prints this time, but loops. Perfect circles pressed into the ground, one after the other, like someone had been turning in place again and again. "What are those?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Footprints of a dream." "That doesn't help." "Not everything has to help," he replied, which I suppose was true, though wildly unhelpful in itself. He reached into the folds of his coat and pulled out a little scrap of fabric. Red silk, another ribbon. "This was left behind," he said, "where your goat once stood. But not by her." I took it from him carefully. "Then who?" "She has many names," he said, looking off into the trees. "But here she is, the girl who gathers stones." I felt a ripple of something, not fear but awe. Like a page had turned and the story wasn't quite what I thought it was. He stood slowly and walked toward a cluster of trees I hadn't noticed before. Come, there's something you need to hear. We hiked in silence for a few minutes until we reached a quiet glade surrounded by birch trees. In the middle sat a half-buried ring of stones forming a perfect circle. The old ones used to gather here, Mihu said, setting his flute on one of the stones. To sing, to remember, to listen. Who were they? People like you, he said. Ones who noticed the rhymes, who didn't look away when the world got strange. I knelt by the ring. A faint humming filled the air, not sound exactly. More like the sense of music just beyond hearing. My fingers brushed one of the stones. It was warm, almost pulsing. Mihu sat beside me and began to sing again, quieter this time, and more slowly. When stone is stacked and ribbon tied, when moon has passed and wind has sighed, the one who waits will turn and see the hidden path, the silent key. The words curled around me like smoke. I wasn't sure what they meant, but I felt them settle somewhere deep in my bones, like seeds planted under skin. When the song ended, Mihu turned to me. You're not here just for the goat. I figured that out, I said softly. You were meant to hear, to follow, to what? He tapped the stone I was touching. To remember. I didn't ask again. He wouldn't answer in a straight line, and some part of me didn't want him to. Not yet. We walked back slowly. On the way, I noticed more of those looping footprints in the dust circles, almost like someone dancing without moving forward. That night, I dreamt of a great spiral. I was standing in the center, and the girl with the basket of stones was walking the spiral's edge. Every time she stepped, a bell chimed. And in the center of the spiral right beneath me, something was sleeping. It wasn't scary, but it felt important. When I woke up, the spiral was still in my mind. Not just the shape and actual place. I didn't know where it was yet, but I had a feeling Mihu did, and I was going to find it. That morning, I didn't wait for signs. I pulled on my boots, grabbed a pouch of dried apricots from the pantry, and slipped Grandma's walking stick from beside the door. She didn't ask where I was going, just gave me that knowing look and handed me a bottle of water wrapped in a scarf. The village was hushed, already warm, even though the sun had barely crested the hills. A soft breeze tugged at the hem of my coat as I passed the garden gate. Then the crooked fence with the rooster that always glared at me. I didn't know exactly where I was heading, but my feet moved like they'd done it before. I took the long way past the grove, cutting through the meadow where fireflies danced at night, and ended up by the old wooden fence behind the schoolhouse. It hadn't been used in decades. I'd only noticed it because something had changed since the day before. A message had been nailed to it. The wood was cracked and mossy, the nails rusted, but the parchment was clean tied with another red ribbon. I pulled it down gently. The words were written in the same careful hand as the earlier rhyme. You've heard the songs, you found the stone. Now cross the field that sings alone. Where crows don't land and flowers turn, the circle waits for your return. I turned it over. There was a spiral drawn in faint ink, just like the ones I'd seen carved into tree trunks and river stones. But this time I could tell it was a map. I traced the path with my thumb. There was a hill, then a bend, then a lone tree. It clicked. I knew where it was. A place behind the cornfields near where the orchard gave way to wild grass. I'd seen it once when we were picking elderberries, but I wasn't allowed to wander there. Grandma said the land had soft places. Now I understood what she meant. I followed the map. The path was overgrown, but strangely easy to walk, almost like it remembered me. I passed a crow perched on a post who didn't caw, just watched me silently as I moved. The trees grew twisted here, but not in a scary way, more like they were leaning in to listen. At the edge of the clearing, I saw it. A wide field ringed by a shallow trench with no flowers in the center, just tall grass waving in rhythm with the wind. No crows, no bees, total hush. I stepped into it. The grass crunched underfoot, not dry, just brittle like it had given up pretending to be alive. In the center, just as the parchment promised, was a stone circle. But unlike the one Mihu had shown me, this one was complete. 12 stones, equally spaced, each carved with a spiral. Some small, some long, some interrupted like they'd been etched by a hand that trembled. I walked the circle slowly counterclockwise. It felt right. When I reached the sixth stone, something flickered just for a moment in the air. A shimmer, then gone. And then I heard it, a voice. Not Mihu's, not the ribbon girl's, my own. But younger, humming. The melody was faint, like it had been buried in the wind and finally blown loose. I crouched and placed my hand on the sixth stone. It was warm. And then, faint but real, I saw it etched into the side. Mina, 5 years old. My heart skipped. I didn't remember carving that. Did I? More voices followed, echoes layered on top of each other, growing louder but never jarring. Children laughing, a goat bleating, a flute playing a high spiraling tune. Then Mihu's voice, not rhyming this time, just speaking. You've come further than most. I turned and he was there, leaning on his staff, quiet as ever. I've been here before, I said. He nodded. When you were very small, before you forgot. Wahan Meichach. He looked at me gently. Some children see more clearly. The village lets them wander. The grove invites them in. The girl brings the stones. But in time, they forget until they're ready to remember. And the goat, he chuckled, a helper, a nudge, a gentle bell in the dark. I looked at the stone again. Why spirals? Because they lead you back to the center. And then out again. Never the same place, but always the same path. I sat in the circle as Mihu took out his flute. He played a short tune, one I had heard in a dream. When he finished, the air inside the ring shimmered once more, and something changed. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it. A part of me had come back. I think I remember the girl, I said. She remembers you, he said. She always does. We sat in silence until the sun slipped toward the trees. The light shifted, the stones glowed faintly, and I felt calmer. Not finished, but steadier. Like I'd been walking with a stone in my shoe and finally removed it. As we stood to leave, I looked back at the sixth stone. The spiral shimmered faintly, and I knew it would always be waiting. Market day in the village always had its own rhythm. Stalls appeared as if by magic. The scent of fried dough and roasted corn filled the air, and chickens were briefly declared currency by children in large straw hats. Even Grandma, who rarely left her garden, tied on her green headscarf and marched off with her basket swinging like a pendulum. I usually stayed close to her on market days, mostly because she'd buy me a pastry shaped like a fish, but today my mind was elsewhere. I had the spiral map in my pocket, the bell tied gently to my belt, and a growing feeling that something was about to change. The square buzzed with conversation. Old men argued gently over the price of onions. A teenage boy was balancing peaches on his head, while a little girl tossed tiny apricots into a basket 3 meters away with suspicious accuracy. But none of them noticed what I saw next. A single apple rolled past my feet. It was a deep red, almost too red, the kind you imagine in fairy tales. I bent down to pick it up, but as I reached for it, it wobbled away again, like it was being nudged by invisible fingers. I followed. Another apple appeared near the pottery stall, then another by the fabric vendor. Each time I picked one up, another appeared just ahead. A trail. They led me away from the crowd through a narrow alley that smelled of lavender and pipe smoke, down to the quiet lane behind the church. I had never been here on my own. The buildings were older, quieter. The windows had lace curtains, and there were more shadows than light. And then I saw it. The ribbon girl. She was leaning against an old stone wall, her basket empty this time, her ribbons fluttering in the wind. You found the apples, she said simply. Were they yours, I asked. Not exactly. I just moved them along. I held one up. They led me here. They always do if you're listening. She stepped away from the wall and walked toward the edge of the path, where a low gate opened into a garden I'd never seen before. Wildflowers burst from every corner, bluebells, columbine, yellow lilies, and in the center stood an apple tree twisted into a perfect spiral. At its base, a stone bench. Sit, she said. I did. Tell me what you remember. I hesitated. I remember the stone circle and the name on the rock. My name, from when I was 5. She nodded. I remember the song Mihu played, and being here. Once, maybe more than once. She handed me a small wooden token from her basket. It was round carved with the same spiral. Keep this, she said. It helps when things begin to blur again. What is this place, I asked. She smiled. It's a garden for remembering. Things you knew before you knew them. I looked around. The petals on some flowers moved even without a breeze. Bees hovered nearby but never landed. A small bird was sitting absolutely still on a branch, eyes wide, as if it too was listening. I came here before, didn't I? I said softly. You planted that tree, she said, on your first visit. The apple tree. It had that same twist as the spiral carvings. I reached out and touched its bark. It was warm. I don't remember doing that, I whispered. You will, she said. The more you walk the path, the more it gives back. We sat in silence for a while. Then she pointed to a pile of smooth stones by the fence. Some were carved with symbols, others with names. One of them simply said, Echo. What's that one, I asked. It's a story not yet finished, she replied. I wanted to ask more, but she stood brushing petals from her skirt. Time to go. The path shifts if you stay too long. I stood too, holding the token tightly. Will I see you again? Of course, she said. You've always been walking toward me. She passed through the gate and vanished into the alley. I turned to look back at the tree once more, then headed out of the garden. The trail of apples was gone, but the market square was still bustling. Grandma was exactly where I'd left her, bartering aggressively over a head of lettuce with a man who looked afraid for his life. Where did you run off to? She asked when I joined her. Just following apples, I said. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. Good day for apples. That night I placed the spiral token beside my bed. I didn't dream of ribbons or goats or even stone circles. I dreamed of the tree. It had grown taller, and every apple it dropped made a gentle ringing sound as it hit the grass. The next day, everything felt oddly ordinary. The sky was blue with a few lazy clouds. Puff was chewing on a cabbage leaf she'd clearly stolen from Grandma's garden. I helped hang the laundry and even swept the porch without being asked. But underneath all that normalness, something was shifting. Like the air before a summer storm, quiet, heavy waiting. I couldn't stop thinking about the apple tree, about the way it had spiraled up toward the sky, and how its bark had felt like it remembered me. I needed to go back. But when I tried to retrace my steps from the market down the alley with lavender past the pottery stand behind the church, I found only empty air. No apples, no ribbon girl. The gate was gone, and in its place just an ivy-covered wall with nothing behind it. I even knocked once, feeling silly. Nothing. So I did what I always did when the world made less sense than usual. I looked for Mihu. I found him at the far end of the pasture, herding a sheep with one horn and a suspicious limp. He gave me a sideways glance. Lost again, he asked. I think I was remembering, I said, but then I forgot again. He nodded, unsurprised. That's how remembering works. I can't find the tree, I said, the one in the garden. You won't, not today. Why not? He crouched down and examined a tuft of grass, because the path turned. I sat down beside him. So what do I do now? He pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket, folded into a tight square. Without looking at it, he handed it to me. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't a rhyme this time. It was a drawing, a house round at the base with a pointed roof and smoke curling from the chimney. A little spiral on the door. "I've never seen this place," I said. "You have," he said. "In pieces, in dreams, in the corners of other memories." I stared at the drawing. There was a number written in the corner, 512. "I don't know what that means," I said. "You will when you get there." I glanced up. "Is it far?" "Not if you walk slowly." Classic Mihu answer. So I walked. The hills behind the village grew taller the further you went. Most kids never climbed past the blueberry rocks, big flat stones where the moss smelled sweet and bees hovered lazily in summer. But I kept going, past the rocks, past the old tree stump shaped like a bear, past the fence that was more vine than wood, and then I saw it, a crooked chimney poking through a stand of tall grass. As I got closer, the house revealed itself. Round base, pointed roof, spiral on the door. It looked exactly like the drawing. There was no path to it, but my feet didn't mind. I stood in front of the door, unsure whether to knock. Before I could decide, it creaked open. And inside it was soft. That's the only word that fits. The light was soft. The air smelled of dust and chamomile. A single chair sat beside a round table covered in smooth stones, folded paper, and a half-eaten plum. And there she was, the ribbon girl. Except this time she wasn't holding her basket. She was writing. When she saw me, she didn't look startled. She smiled like she'd just been waiting for me to show up. "You found the house." "I think I did." She gestured to the chair. "Sit." So I did. "Where is this?" I asked. She picked up one of the papers from the table and handed it to me. It was a list. A goat bell, a red ribbon, a spiral token, a name carved in stone, a tree planted, a story half remembered. "These are yours," she said, "pieces you left behind." Why? She looked at me gently. "Because stories need places to live. You've been leaving pieces for years. Am I supposed to do something with them now?" "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe you just need to keep collecting. Sometimes we build a story without knowing what it is." I looked around the house. There were other tokens too: pressed flowers, tiny bells, smooth stones with thumb-sized dents. All things that felt vaguely familiar, like I might have touched them once in a dream. And then I saw the wall, covered in spirals, some small and tightly wound, others wide and unfinished. Each one had a name beneath it. Some I recognized, Mihu Grandma Puff. Others I didn't, but one stood out. Mewina. Underneath it, 512 years old. That number again. I turned to her. "What happened when I was 5.5? She stood and walked to the wall, placing her hand gently on my spiral. "You stepped off the path," she said, and the stories started to scatter. "I want to find them." She turned and smiled. "You already are." We sat in silence for a long while. No riddles, no rhymes, just stillness. When I left the house, the sun had lowered behind the hills, casting long golden light across the grass. I turned back once, expecting to see the house disappear or shrink into the earth. But it didn't. It stood there quiet and real, waiting. That night, I placed the folded paper, the drawing of the house, next to my spiral token and Puff's bell. One day, I thought, I'll have all the pieces, and I'll know what the story is. The next morning began with rain, not a loud, stormy kind. Just a soft drizzle that turned the garden paths to muddy ribbons and made everything smell like wet mint and chimney smoke. Puff, always the optimist, dashed out and returned covered in mud 10 seconds later. Grandma didn't scold her. She just tossed a rag onto the porch and muttered, "Goat has no sense." I took it as a cue to stay inside, but my fingers were already itching. The house felt too small, the walls too quiet. So I slipped the drawing of the house into my pocket, now slightly crumpled from sleep, and made my way up to the attic. The attic was one of those places every child either feared or worshipped. Ours smelled like old apples and mothballs with wooden beams that creaked like old knees. It was filled with trunks, jars of marbles, yellowed books in languages I couldn't read, and my favorite, a tin box marked Mina's important things. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were mismatched treasures, a rock shaped like a shoe, a key with no lock, 3 pieces of string tied in identical knots, and a small bottle filled with dried rose petals. At the very bottom was a folded napkin with crayon drawings on it. I smoothed it out. There, drawn in messy spirals and stick figures, was the same little house I had visited yesterday. The same spiral on the door. I sat back, breath catching. I had seen it before. Not just in the dream, not just now. I'd drawn it. That number, again 512, was written in the corner in shaky crayon handwriting. Something had happened then. I didn't know what, but it was beginning to glow at the edges of my memory like a picture coming into focus. Suddenly, a knock at the attic window. I nearly jumped, then crawled over and peeked out. It was Mihu, standing in the rain under a wide hat holding a very small umbrella shaped like a leaf. Of course it was Mihu. I climbed down and met him by the front gate. Puff came trotting behind me, still damp and wearing a string of Grandma's clothespins like a necklace. "Come, Mihu," said, handing me a second umbrella. "The circle's humming today." He said it like one might say the bread is warm or the ducks are back. Casual, unalarming, utterly magical. We walked in the drizzle, following a trail of mushroom caps poking out of the ground, like someone had been planting them in a line. Mihu hummed softly as we passed through the orchard. When we reached the old willow hill, the grass shimmered faintly with rain. The stone circle was waiting, but something was different. Each stone had something resting on it now. A red ribbon, a pebble with a name, a wooden token, even a piece of string tied in a perfect knot. I froze. "These are mine," I whispered. He nodded. "Pieces of you. You've been gathering them longer than you knew." "But how some of these I thought I lost?" He pointed to the spiral on the central stone. It pulsed faintly like breath. "Nothing is truly lost, just misplaced. The stories stay." We walked around the circle slowly. With each step, the rain seemed to fade, not stop, but hush, like it was falling in a different time. Then he spoke again softly. "The key you held was not for doors, but for the path inside the floors. Beneath your feet, beneath the sound, a memory waits beneath the ground." And just like that, I remembered. A game. I was 5.5, hiding from the rain under Grandma's kitchen table, drawing on napkins, whispering songs to myself. And someone, another child, was there, not from the village. We played all afternoon, making spirals and flower-building circles out of sugar cubes, whispering rhymes we didn't understand. I blinked. "The ribbon girl. I've known her since then," I said aloud. "She's not always a girl," Mihu said, sitting down on the edge of the circle. "Sometimes she's a song, sometimes a path, sometimes a silence." "What is she?" A reminder. He pulled out his flute and began to play. But I wasn't listening to the tune anymore. I was seeing flashes. A swing made of ribbon tied between 2 pear trees. A voice calling, "Come back when it's time." A hand placing a tiny bell in mine. The spiral wasn't just a path. It was a clock. Not for telling time, but for returning to it. I sat beside Mihu, the stones damp under my palms. "I don't think I ever left," I said quietly. He smiled. "You didn't. You just walked a longer circle." As the tune faded, the stones glowed softly and the ribbons fluttered without wind. The rain paused. Not stopped, just paused. Like the whole world took a breath. I closed my eyes. And in the silence, I heard the voice from my dream again. "She gathers what the world lets go and keeps it safe where stories grow." When I opened my eyes, the circle was empty again. But I knew the path now, and I knew I'd find it again. Even if it turned, even if it hid, I carried it with me now. The last few days of summer came on quiet feet. The morning light softened. The goats slept in longer clumps. Even the village market began winding down baskets no longer brimming, but carefully chosen. A peach here, a loaf of bread there. The world, it seemed, was preparing to exhale. So was I. But not because the story was over. Because I'd finally remembered the beginning. I sat on the back step that morning, holding the ribbon token between my fingers. The spiral carved into it wasn't just a shape anymore. It was a trail, a memory, a map. Puff was curled beside me, her bell now tied with a ribbon that had faded from red to pink from too much sun and rain. She looked up at me with those calm, goatish eyes and blinked like she already knew what came next. Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a little village tucked between hills, the kind of place where the goats wear bells, and the trees remember your name. I whispered to the air, letting the words form like smoke. You might not have experienced this before, but once when I was very small, I met someone who never quite left. The rhythm of it comforted me. The sun wasn't quite over the ridge yet, so I took the long path through the orchard. The apples were heavy now, some lying bruised on the grass. Bees danced between the fallen fruit. And when I reached the stone circle, yes, I went back, I found something waiting. A new stone, not one of the 12 from before. A small, smooth pebble set in the center. On it, carved with care, were the words, "Welcome back." I didn't cry, but my chest swelled with something so big and gentle. It could have been tears if I let it. The ribbon girl appeared just as the wind shifted. She stepped from between two sun-dappled birches and stood with her basket held lightly at her side. "Is it over?" I asked. She shook her head, not even close. "But I found the garden and the house and the circle." She smiled. "Yes, now you can begin." It should have confused me, but it didn't. I sat in the center of the stones, cross-legged with the new pebble beside me. "What do I do? You listen." She placed a blank piece of parchment in my lap, a charcoal pencil beside it. I can't remember everything I said softly. "You don't have to. Just start where it feels warm." So I wrote, "Hey guys, tonight we follow the sound of a bell, the kind that disappears in dreams and comes back just when you need it most." And the rest came gently. The ribbon, the rhymes, the flute, the apple tree, each word like a footstep on soft earth. Each memory once hidden now rising like mist. The ribbon girl sat beside me as I wrote, occasionally placing a small stone beside my knee. I didn't ask what they were for, I just let them gather. Around noon, Mihu appeared, balancing a jar of honey on his head and eating a peach. He gave a little bow when he saw me writing. "You're doing it," he said. "What tanaburatiman?" Turning remembering into story. That's the trick. I smiled. "It doesn't feel like a trick." "Good," he said. "Then it's working." He played a short tune on his flute before disappearing again into the trees. And I kept writing. The spiral wasn't a riddle anymore. It was an invitation. To walk, to gather, to remember. Not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever lost a thread and wanted to find their way back, even if they didn't know what they'd lost, even if they didn't know there was a path. That night, as the sun slipped behind the ridge and the sky burned soft orange and pink, I returned home. Grandma didn't ask where I'd been. She just pointed at the soup pot and said, "Stir that unless you want dinner to taste like shoe." I stirred. Puff curled up by the stove and let out one long, slow sigh. I slipped the parchment under my pillow beside the token and the folded napkin drawing I had made at 5.5. And for the first time in a long while, I fell asleep without dreaming. Because I was already inside the dream, the night settled in gently, like a soft blanket pulled up to the chin. Outside, the wind stirred the apple leaves with a sound so delicate it could have been mistaken for distant whispering. In the quiet, even the insects seemed to hum in slower rhythms, their songs blending with the creak of wood and the occasional jingle of Puff's bell as she shifted in her sleep. I lay still, eyes half open, watching the soft shadows on the ceiling. The room smelled faintly of chamomile and old paper. The spiral token rested on my bedside table, catching a sliver of moonlight. I reached out and touched it, tracing the gentle groove of the carving. Around and around, not to a center, but to stillness. And in that stillness, I remembered the girl with ribbons in her hair stacking stones beside the stream. Mihu's quiet voice delivering riddles like gifts wrapped in fog. The apple tree that grew in spirals and dropped fruit that rang like tiny bells. The house with the smoke curling like questions into the sky. And the circle, the one that never ended, only widened. All of it was still with me, not gone, not even past. Just tucked quietly into the folds of memory, waiting to be walked again. The spiral never truly ends, you know. It just becomes softer, more familiar. You walk it slower, you hum the tune under your breath, and one day, without realizing it, you arrive somewhere you didn't know you were going, only to find something that's been waiting for you all along. So breathe in and out. Let the wind take your questions. Let the rhythm of remembering lull you. The story will still be here in the morning. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.